My uncle stood in his kitchen, looked me dead in the eye, and told me my grandfather left me nothing. Not a dollar. Not the house. Nothing. And I believed him. For 6 months, I believed him. Until I found a floorboard that wasn't supposed to move.
I'm Jake, and before I tell you what was under that floorboard, I need you to understand something about my grandfather. My grandfather, we called him Pop, raised me for a good chunk of my childhood.
My parents were around, but they worked a lot, and Pop's place was basically my second home. He had this workshop out behind his house, this old detached garage he'd converted into a woodworking shop. Sawdust everywhere, tools hanging on pegboards he'd built himself. I spent more Saturdays in that workshop than I can count, just handing him things, watching him work, listening to him talk about nothing and everything at the same time. So when he passed, it hit me hard. But I want to be honest, the grief wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came about 3 weeks after the funeral, when my Uncle Denny called me and asked me to come by his house to talk about the will. I remember sitting on his couch, and he's got this folder in front of him, real official looking, and he tells me that Pop had updated his will about a year before he died. He says the new version left the house, the land, the savings, pretty much everything, to him. Not to me, not to my mom, who was Pop's daughter. Just Denny. I asked him why. He said Pop had gotten close to him in his final year, that Pop felt like Denny had been the one taking care of him day to day, and that Pop wanted to make sure Denny was taken care of, since Denny had, quote, had it rough the last few years. I didn't push back. Honestly, I didn't know how to. I was grieving, I was confused, and Denny's my uncle. Why would I assume the guy was lying to my face? So I did the thing that felt like the mature thing to do. I let it go. I told myself Pop had his reasons, that maybe I didn't know the whole story, that fighting over money right after losing someone I loved wasn't the way I wanted to spend that time. I focused on work. I focused on my life. I didn't go to that workshop for months because honestly, it hurt too much to be there without him. Fast forward about half a year. My mom kept asking me to go clean out some of Pop's personal stuff from the workshop before Denny, who now legally owned the property, decided to sell it or gut it or whatever he was planning. So one Saturday, I finally went. Walking in there again, it was like getting hit in the chest. Same smell of cedar and machine oil. Same tools on the same pegboard. I started going through drawers, boxing up stuff, mostly just old receipts and instruction manuals for tools he'd bought 30 years ago. And then, underneath his workbench, I found a loose floorboard. I only noticed it because I stepped on it, and it gave a little, which wasn't normal for that floor. Pop built everything solid. I pried it up, and there was a wooden box under there. Not fancy, just a cigar box, really, but sealed up with some old tape. Inside was a stack of letters, some receipts, a couple of photographs, and a USB drive in a little plastic case. I sat right down on that workshop floor and read through the letters first. They were from Pop, but they weren't addressed to anyone. They read more like a journal. He talked about his health declining, about wanting to make sure everything was fair when he was gone, about specific things he wanted, split between me, my mom, and yeah, even Denny, because despite everything, Pop still loved his son. Then I got to the receipts. They were from a notary and a lawyer's office, dated the same month as the letters, months before the will Denny had shown me. That will, the one that left everything to Denny, was dated after these documents, which didn't make sense if Pop's real final wishes were the ones I was holding. I plugged in the USB drive on my laptop, right there in the workshop. There was one video file. I hit play, and there was Pop, sitting in that same workshop, looking thinner than I remembered him looking in person, but very much all there mentally. He said he wanted to record this because he didn't fully trust that things would go the way he intended after he was gone. He laid out, plain as day, how he wanted the house, the land, and his savings divided between me and my mom, with a smaller portion set aside for Denny to help him get back on his feet. He said if anyone showed a different document claiming otherwise, that document was not legitimate, and he was leaving this recording and these papers as proof. I sat there for a long time after that video ended. I wasn't even angry yet. Honestly, I think I was just stunned. It took a few days for the anger to actually settle in, once it hit me what Denny had actually done. He hadn't just been the beneficiary of some update Pop made in his final year. He'd forged a document, dated it to look legitimate, and used my grief and my trust in him to make sure I never asked questions. I didn't call Denny. I didn't confront him. I went straight to a lawyer. I brought everything: the letters, the receipts, the video file on the drive. The lawyer had a forensic document expert compare the signatures and the notary stamp on Denny's version of the will against real notarized documents from that office. Turned out the notary seal on Denny's will didn't match any registered notary in the county. It was fabricated. Combined with Pop's video statement and the earlier, legitimate paperwork we'd found, we had a case. It went to probate court. Denny showed up with his lawyer, looking confident, like this was some misunderstanding that would blow over. That confidence didn't last long once the judge saw the forensic report on the notary stamp, and especially once the video was entered as evidence. You could see it on his face. He knew it was over. The fraudulent will was thrown out. The estate was redistributed the way Pop actually wanted it, split between me and my mom, with that smaller portion still set aside for Denny. Because even after everything, that's what Pop wanted, and honestly, I decided to respect that. Denny, on top of losing the case, ended up facing fraud charges for the forged documents. That part was out of my hands at that point. That was the state deciding to prosecute once the forensic evidence came out. Here's the part I actually want people to hear, though. I didn't do any of this to get back at Denny. I know how these stories usually go. Somebody gets wronged, and then the whole second half is about payback, about watching the other person suffer. That's not what this was for me. Once the truth came out, and the estate was where it should have been, I didn't feel the need to rub it in his face or make his life harder than the consequences already were doing on their own. What I did instead was use part of my share to fix up Pop's workshop, rewired it, fixed the roof, replaced some of the tools that had worn out over the decades. And now, it's not just my personal workshop anymore. I opened it up as a small community woodworking space, a couple nights a week, mostly teaching basic skills to whoever wants to learn, kids, retirees, whoever shows up. I named it after him. Figured that was a better use of what he left me than anything else I could have done with it. People ask me sometimes if I regret not going harder after Denny, pushing for more than the legal consequences he already got. And honestly, no. Pop spent his whole life building things, not tearing people down. The best way I could think of to honor him wasn't by winning some personal grudge match with my uncle. It was by making sure his actual wishes were respected, and then turning that workshop into something that outlives all of us. That's the story. Grandpa built things his whole life, right down to the very end. He built one last thing nobody expected, a way to make sure the truth couldn't be buried along with him.
If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that the truth has a way of finding daylight. It may take months, even years, but eventually it finds its way home.